Hi, Alex. You
Hi, Rich.
I think you sent me a message saying we should have a conversation about micro solidarity stuff. Um, what do you have in mind?
Um, one of the one of the key reflections of the Micro Solidarity Summer Camp is this kind of insight into it might be good to support the group in finding the conflicts that are sort of there already, that are latent in the group. Or it might be helpful to surface those tensions so they can be digested and the sort of, if you keep conflict suppressed too long, then it'll explode or something. And sort of the inverse of that, of like, well, how can we best, yeah, facilitate that healthy way of being
Hmm.
with that or something. Yeah.
Have you got examples of where you've seen it go like moderately well or very well that you're like, this is an exemplary, or at least this is heading in the right direction?
Mm. I actually quite liked Roland bringing up his his conflict that he felt was between him and the whole group at the summer camp last year.
Hmm.
I felt that was actually quite good. That was quite skillful and quite useful. Um, yeah, I'm not sure what the space was where he had the opportunity to do that in terms of it being facilitated well or something.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't remember.
That's I've got some more information on that. It's really ironic actually in a way because the space was every morning during the sort of like setup for the day, there was time to hear from the group.
Mm.
Um, and the reason I say it's ironic is as much as I can remember, which is like quite fuzzy now a year later, but I think I agree. He had a very skillful way of saying like, hey, it looks like a lot of people are having a great time, and I'm not really having a great time, and this is my diagnosis of what's going on. Um, and I'm not sure I couldn't put into words what he said, but my memory is something like that it feels a bit stuffy or like there's too much structure or it's a bit constricting or like the group is the rules are kind of like choking out the fun or something along those
Ah,
lines.
mhm.
And the reason I say that's ironic is because he had that space to voice that and it went really well. I felt like the group received it really well and it sort of catalyzed a like really healthy shift. And then at this last summer camp, we didn't really have that space in the morning where there was time to hear from everyone and say, well, that would be a structure, like there would be more structure, more hopefully enabling constraints, having those kind of spaces where you're, yeah, actively trying to hear the things that are otherwise being excluded.
Right. Yeah, that would be very ironic. Maybe he did say that. I'm trying to remember. There was something about like anger and conflict being avoided or something that I remember him bringing up. But maybe that
Yeah.
was a separate thing. I don't know.
I mean, this
But
happens at many, many gatherings, right? And many different, not just gatherings, but groups in general that people are attracted in to some degree. They're not fully bought in, but they're like, there's definitely something here for me. And then I'm not fully satisfied with it. And my complaint is this group is too harmony seeking. It's too harmonious. It's too um there's no space for anger, there's no space for divergence. And I I wonder if that is kind of like a natural phasing thing that happens that like you don't want a lot of divergence at the start. Like this, I feel like you need to have some kind of coherent flow um, to create a sense of us, to create a sense of momentum. Like this is what we're doing, and it's so great you're all here. And oh, I'm so open to meeting new people, and I'm curious to get to know them all. Like you kind of want that attitude, I think, to start with. But it seems natural that okay, we've been here 2 days, we're really getting along well. There's a kind of flow, and now can we start to hear, yeah, what stories are being marginalized, what perspectives have been left out of that, and rather than like I think there's two failure modes. One is you never hear anything negative, and the other one is you only hear negative things. Like both of those failure modes, I think, are unpleasant. And it's yeah, it's kind of like what's a graceful way to invite in like often I think the discomfort, disagreement, unease, um, incoherence, dissatisfaction, those kind of traits, when they're raised in a skillful way, they just take us to the next level. It's like there's a way of like ideally the group's anti-fragile, and you only know it's anti-fragile once it's come under stress. Like you need that provocation. Um, but it does seem like quite kind of a artful move or skillful move, like whether it's in the person expressing or it's in the structures that are sort of inviting them in, like how to make that flow. Obviously, it's fine. It's not like about making it seamless or something, but that it's likely, that's biased towards an increase in connection and satisfaction, and that, yeah,
Yeah. Mm. Yeah, totally. And there is this sense of I have this sense of like there is an earliest point where that can be raised, so to speak. And so you can help make that earliest point a little bit earlier by inducing reflection or something. But that's also possible. But the thing I'm mostly talking about is okay, at the point where the person has reached some clarity for themselves,
mm,
how long does it take them to be able to raise it in the group somehow?
mm,
And
mm.
so, um, yeah, I think that's what I'm curious about how to do that well. Like, yeah, I
Yeah,
agree. Like it right there is the honeymoon phase at the beginning, and
yeah,
um there is there is that kind of gelling that hopefully happens, and then there's the I don't know, there's some thing we covered in university of like there's norming, forming,
yeah,
norming, storming, something. So the storming phase comes eventually. But I guess the thing I'm thinking is like, I feel like you can, if you go the other way and you go like, we don't want the storming phase, we don't want the conflict. There's ways of kind of jamming the system to try and suppress it, right?
yeah,
And one of
yeah,
them, I think, is to avoid the group ever coming into a collective state of mind that is reflective, or then the other one would be to have like kind of a field of like, no, conflict is not okay, right? And then have that kind of implicitly or explicitly like increased, that kind of like dissidence is punished or something. And then maybe someone, a tall poppy pops up and 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 brings in conflict there,
shame,
like
shame,
shunned.
shame.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I feel like that's like the really bad end. But then
Mm,
also I think you can do better, right? There's like ways of, yeah. And for me, there was a sense of, our morning sessions were quite focused on what do we want to spend today on. So they were kind of forward focused and kind of focused on the objective, like
yeah,
on the object, and not reflective. And like I totally agree that like having long sessions where the group reflects on itself can also be really tedious. So there's a balance, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think my brain's going a couple directions at once. I think the one that's most important to me is there's an individual orientation towards dissatisfaction or discomfort that I want to prioritize, and I want to upskill people in, and I want to like have a shared culture around this is what you do when you think things are not going so well. Um, I was just on the phone with Doro, and she was talking about Tree Week, where there was some music happening in one room, and she's like, "It's nice that people are playing music, but this is not really a good room for it." And she was thinking about how do I change the context so that it's like better set up for people to be collaborating. Um, and she did the thing which to me is often the ideal thing, which is she found a way to make headway towards her own satisfaction without any need to get buy-in from anyone else. She was just like, this is the wrong room to be playing music in. I'm gonna go into that other room. It's much better. I'm gonna do my thing. And if people agree with me that it's a good thing, then naturally energy will start to develop over there. And then the next thing happened, which is like extremely common as well, which is that, oh, I don't actually have what it takes to create the satisfying experience by myself. Like, I need more gear, I need more collaborators. And then she started asking people specifically, like taking that vulnerable move of saying, like, hey, can you help? Can I borrow some of your gear? Do you want to do this game with me? Like that sense of finding that seed of discomfort and calling in the support that she needed to start mapping out a constructive journey that gradually accumulates a mandate and support and a kind of legitimacy in the field without having to ask anyone's permission or like to say, hey, hit the brakes, things are going terribly badly, someone's done me wrong, or like making an appeal to an authority, or but just kind of like naturally accumulating from the sense of dissatisfaction to a creative intervention that solves my need. And oh well, by the way, it turns out everyone is so much happier in this new room. Eventually everyone moves to this new room. It's much more supportive of the kind of experience they want to have. Everyone's delighted, and no one had to like, yeah, have a tedious meeting about it or feel like they were made wrong in the process. It's just like, oh, we just effortlessly flowed to where the natural next step is. And I'm like, if everyone was playing that game, we would very seldom need to have a whole group reflective space where we say, hey, what's not going so well? Because those things would be getting metabolized so effortlessly in the process. There would still be some, I think, but it would be much, much more rare if people knew that that's the game that we're playing here. And
Mm.
I hear myself say that and I'm getting kind of attached to this perspective. And so I'm like very up for being challenged on it.
Yeah. I, I I think I agree that it's like a really nice best case scenario, but it feels like a best case scenario. Like the kind of thing of like, oh, I want to make music in a different room is, yeah, to me it's like the it feels like close to the central example of the kind of thing that you want to see. But other things I think are very difficult. Anything that interacts with the group field, where right, it's like her concern was not about the whole group. So like I don't know what's another example that sort of goes in the other direction. Let's say let's make something fictitious that still illustrates.
Um,
There's something. No, not
yeah.
no. Make it fictional.
Well, I'm going to make it only slightly fictional, which I was going to say, the men in this group talk too much and they're taking too much space and they're not really considerate of gender dynamics.
Mhm. Right.
Um, that would be a sort of typical case where people say there's a problem with the group and the group needs to pay attention to it and change.
Yeah, or it's like yeah, it's like a really group. Like in that case, it would be like all the men in the like. It's a little bit weird. Like this particular thing like has a bit of a smell to me of like, is it really all the men? Like my guess is there were like three people, and then that got extrapolated to the whole group. Um, and that is often the case, which is why I like the thing that you say of like, ah, can we find like other ways of surfacing and creatively resolving these kind of things? But there can be cases where, yeah, like somehow you're getting the sense that, oh yeah, no, it's like all the men somehow. It's like, I don't know, the story that I would come up with is one of the facilitators somehow seems to prefer men voicing things. And then that them facilitating, they're in a position of power. They kind of seem to prefer to hear from men. And then the men are sort of encouraged and they speak a lot. And then that sort of somehow gets stuck in the group field and they keep doing that. And then, right. And then it's a thing. Like, I feel like it's totally something that could happen.
Hmm.
Um, and then I feel like, yeah, yeah. And it's really subtle, right? It's just like, oh, one person had trouble with like three particular men out of 60 and then they generalize to the whole group, right? And they're bringing that concern. Or it could be the other thing of like, oh yeah, there's something that's a bit weird in the whole group dynamic, where actually it might be quite difficult to address it, sort of
Yeah.
bottom up without, yeah.
I think I'm basically very skeptical of any claims about what the group is like.
Hmm.
Um, that I think when you actually interrogate anything, any dynamic, you'll usually find like um that the natural place to prototype solutions is at a small scale anyway. So like if you've got concerns about the gender dynamic, it's like, well, in this conversation with these six people here, I'm going to set an explicit context that invites a different way of participating, and we're going to get evidence if it makes things better or worse. And then if it's better, we're going to let more people know, like, hey, we did this. We switched to Robert's Rules of Order in this meeting, whatever. We have a different game that with a different protocol here, and we got different results, and we can enroll people in with that specific strategy. Um, and I'm trying to think of examples where that doesn't really hold up. Like what is the stuff that the group really needs to cohere on? It's like, well, there's some things about the scheduling where if you want everyone to if you want everyone to have a hand in setting the agenda, you kind of need a synchronized moment. Um, and but I just think there's such a small number of things like that, and that is the responsibility of the hosts. It's like we are delegating responsibility to you to take care of the stuff where everyone needs to be aligned. And the thing that I'm so excited about in micro solidarity is trying to minimize that level of consensus and maximize how much, so like with meal times, for example, if you're not satisfied with the meal times, rather than can we renegotiate meal times, it's like there's like six of us that it turns out really we're on a Spanish diet, not on a German clock. How do we run a parallel track where that is not going to be too disruptive? That to me feels so much more useful than, oh, we're halfway through the event and I'm going to try and change everyone to a Spanish timescale. It's like yeah, it's like to me it's on the host to make the best call that they can about those small number of things where we're aligning, and then it's on everyone else to like lean into the discomfort of parallel prototyping and looking for solutions. And again, as I'm saying this, I'm like, am I missing something important? Yeah, go.
I feel like I have one very like one word pops into my mind that's a very clear example, which is related to the thing you said of like, what does the whole group? And it's common knowledge. Like
Mm.
there's just no way that you can create common knowledge. That's not right. It's just really, really hard to create common knowledge in a group if you don't come together sort of with the whole group or something that counts as sort of the whole group. And my sense is that that is part of they have this sense of like, oh, there is just like the group seeing itself. There's like something involved there of like there is common knowledge within the group that the group is seeing itself and that it is looking at these things. That I think is just not replaceable by the process that you're describing. I'm not
Can you
saying that should be happening all the time, but
can you give me some examples just to ground the common knowledge thing? Like what kind of stuff
sure.
is useful for everyone to know about?
Um, so all of these individual kind of conflicts actually also like sometimes or often depends on sometimes are useful for everyone to know that there is common like it can be useful for there to be common knowledge that oh Roland had this thing about there being too much structure or about anger or something. Um, so there's some sense of like oh everyone knows that there was this thing about anger and structure or something.
Mm, mm,
Um, and that feature is just incredibly useful. You want to be
yeah.
careful to not have too much of that so people don't get overwhelmed and so on, but having that in like small doses I think is extremely useful, and finding the right things of like for example there is like I think one thing that's related to this the sort of the generalization, sorry it's not an example, is sort of what is the group's edge at the moment, like where are we at in terms of are we still in the honeymoon phase or have we moved
Yeah.
on to something else, for example, like
Yeah.
that kind of thing, the common knowledge about that, like us knowing together where we are, I think that's quite useful to have as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think I think the reason that I'm feeling attached to this like personal responsibility side of the equation is like to me that's like a necessary component of the system. And I think you and I agree on that. And I say, okay, that let's assume that that's happening pretty well, and that that's part of the invitation. That people know that ahead of time, that the way that we're talking at the in the scene setting at the start, the way the pods are structured and the way the invitation is structured, that all of that actually is guiding people's attention to one of the games we play here is you get annoyed, you call for support, and you find a creative intervention, and everyone gets better as a result, and we're grateful. Like that's what you're being asked for. It's not a witch hunt approach or a like let's have long meetings to talk about how things are not great approach. Um, I think if that was solid, that would take care of a lot of it. And then there's a bunch of other interventions that I think would support what you're saying. So like and and that maybe like I've had this bias against basically let's just not spend a lot of time with the whole group in a circle. And in a sense, this is a kind of subconscious avoidance strategy. It's just that, well, if we don't have a lot of time with the whole group, then there's not going to be a lot of these kind of discussions happening. Um, and that's been like a conscious choice. It's like I actually trust the group has a lot more capacity when we're running in parallel tracks. But it's an avoidance because it's like compensating for the lack of something. There's lacking this individual skill. But if we had the individual skill happening, um, I mean, one thing that we could have, I think, done more of or done a stronger job of was just like the way, there was the retrospective meeting halfway through and just emergently the way that came out. I think basically Jocelyn and me and Jonas wound up taking up a lot of that space because that was kind of like where the aliveness of the conversation felt to us. And it meant that we didn't really at that moment get into, hey, this is the time, we're halfway through. This is the time to really go, what sense are you making of this whole group? What do you think is, you'd have questions instead of just like what's satisfying or unsatisfying. It's like, what do you think is a mainstream perspective here and what's a marginalized perspective here? And like, can we get any kind of shared sense of what kind of emotions or perspectives are being left off the table? What values are we avoiding? What kinds of people are missing? What kinds of voices are missing? Um, it could be really useful, I think, to have this moment where we're saying, actually, the personal responsibility has got nothing to do with this conversation. It's all about what is the emergent whole that we're constructing? What is the superorganism that we're composing? And are we satisfied with how it looks? And what do we want to do about that? And I think if we could like delineate those two halves of the polarity clearly, the individual and the collective, and say like there's two separate things and we have different devices basically, or different times, different moves, different memes. Um, that could be really juicy. I think it could really, yeah, support this collective evolution process.
Yeah, to me, it's it feels like it's not either or, right? It's like how do you get them playing together harmoniously? Um, how do you avoid putting too much load bearing on one of them, or like, yeah, yeah. What's the right mix? What's the right what brings the best synergy?
And
Um,
on the common knowledge front, like I have a huge amount of confidence in the power of memes. Like for me, a meme is a emergent common knowledge that everyone or most people get to know that was never intentionally designed from the top down by someone with responsibility. But it was like emergently discovered that it's like, oh, this concept has resonance, like the fact that loads of people were playing music at summer camp was not imposed or like it wasn't a pre-existing principle or a role a rule or a structure. It was a meme. It was like, oh, this person's having a good time playing music. That other person is observing it and going like, I also like that, and it's spreading horizontally. Um, and that to me, like, I think a high functioning group can be largely governed through memes. That it's sort of like people notice what's missing, and then in their prototyping of filling in that gap, they're not just looking for what fixes the problem. They're also looking for, they're sort of paying attention to the virality of that solution. Like it's not just that this is a good solution, but that it has a tendency to spread.
yes, something about this. Again, that feels supplementary. That's like, oh yeah,
Mm.
that's great. Um, so I'm there's something with the common knowledge that I know that everyone knows that every like there's this like infinite regress kind of thing that comes when you bring a group together and everyone's paying attention and not asleep or whatever. Um, that I think is quite like there might, yeah, there probably is common knowledge that, oh yeah, there was a lot of musical improvisation at the summer camp. But like like there's some sense in which I'm like not infinitely confident that that's the case. Like I'm like
Mm,
relatively confident that probably everyone knows. So there is like some sense of common knowledge of like, yeah, I think everyone knows that there was a lot of musical improvisation. But like, yeah, maybe some of the people that left after the weekend, like maybe they missed the one or two
mm,
improv sessions that happened, and they somehow they were not quite in tune. And so like I wouldn't be that surprised to talk to someone from the weekend and be like, "Oh yeah, like summer camp was all about musical improvisation." They would go like, "Huh? Okay, I
yeah,
guess yours was." Like it's not right. It wouldn't be that surprising. Well, if like, of course we wouldn't have it, but like in case we had a group session and the musical improvisation, right? So there was actually musical improvisation in the sense of like, was there on Sunday? I'm trying to remember. Like we had the humming thing and so the humming thing, for example, would be the other side, right? Where it's like very clear, like, oh, everyone knows that one of the things at the camp was the humming, and there was common knowledge about that because it was part of the group and that's a group noticing itself. So
mm,
there's something yeah, there's just something to me is like, oh yeah, for some things this is very crucial. And like I totally agree with you that for most things it's not crucial. And people overestimate the amount.
yeah,
Like I'm totally with you there.
yeah,
People
yeah,
overestimate the amount to which you need to create common knowledge about everything, how you that you need to discuss everything in the group, that you need to solve everything top down as a rule for everyone. People totally overestimate it. And I'm totally with you on that. It's just to me, it's like but like for some things it's unavoidable, right? And that's why we have things like the opening session. That's why we have things like closing sessions. That's why we have whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I guess there's a question of how much capacity does the group have for sense making and making updates to how it operates. And so like if what we're dealing with is a group of 12 people who are going to be living together for 20 years, or if we're talking about a group of 100 people that are going to spend 3 days together, it's like the capacity changes a lot. And I think I have a principle of like the larger the group, the less time we spend as a full circle, and the shorter the group, the less time. Um, and yeah, in a situation where you had, say, up to 60 people for a week, I think it would really make sense to do opening, middle, and closing. And that the middle is all about we're actually going to take a couple of hours here. There's going to be a process that we're like surfacing all the dynamics that you're observing and which one, like prioritizing which ones you think are actually important to make some kind of changes on. And then we're going to make some changes for the second half. Um, but if it's less than a week, then I'm like, I mean, it takes 3 days for a group to discover anyway what kind of dynamics are truly playing. And I would just hope that the hosts are kind of in tune enough with what the group needs, that they're doing a good enough, that they're doing a better job, that the sort of like the decrees of the hosting team are actually more liberatory than any kind of consensus building process that you could do with a fresh group of 50 to 100 people kind of figuring it out over the course of a couple of days. That I guess this is again like a a point of divergence in my orientation to how groups work compared to where a lot of people think that just starting from a democratic practice at the start, like what's important to us, what are our norms and agreements, like a lot of people would think that's the best place to start, and and I think that's usually like a way to create a very imbalanced, like that you listen to you wind up with the tyranny of the minority, basically, that you wind up with a few people that are um, very agitated about a handful of topics, and everyone else is kind of like unaffiliated, and then they go into that process, and then they come out the other side, and it's like, oh yeah, all the strong advocates got their way, and everyone was like, yeah, I guess I don't have a strong opposition to that. Um, Whereas I think, yeah, an empowered hosting team can actually do a better job of creating a context that's more supportive of more different kinds of people than running a democratic process in a short time. Like if you've got a longer time, then sure, democracy, absolutely. Like ideally for me, what would happen even if we were thinking like a week-long event with a midpoint update, that would coincide with in the second half of the event, the hosting team steps the power distance between the host and the guest kind of halves again, that it's much more like people you start by the hosts start by getting the guests to complain a bit, and then they end that meeting by saying, "No, it's up to you. You're now responsible. So run it your way." We did the first
Uh-huh.
couple of days.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think I'm with you on the running it as democracy. I think I'm very much with you on that. I think the thing I'm very attached to, so you were like, oh, I'm very attached to the people creating their individual invitations and making stuff happen. And again, I'm with you on that. I think the thing I'm very attached to is having a small, like a very small space to just surface things and then actually not really resolve it very much,
Yeah.
except maybe in the democratic halfway point that you were just mentioning. That sounds like a good idea, and that's sort of what we did on Sunday. But I feel like we didn't have enough time for that. Actually, I think
Yeah.
we better to have more time. Um, yeah, so it's less about, oh, I want to have a whole involved governance kind of process thing, and more like, hmm, I think like in my head actually is really specific. It's like, around dinner or like just before dinner actually would be a really good time to just have like 10 minutes or something to have to surface what people think is going on in the group that can then
Mm,
inform the evening and can also inform how the open space is opened the next day and is like a back
mm,
channel from the group to the hosts so they can facilitate stuff, is a back channel from the group to individual people that might host different sessions as a result, and sort of kickstart the process that you're so in favor of. And like I
mm.
notice I'm very attached to like, oh, that's what we should have done that.
I'm very up for testing something like that. Like if you have that clarity, I trust that clarity that you're feeling. You know what I mean? Like that this is a specific move to try. I think that the risk to me would be, or the artfulness of it would be, this is you know, this is a chance for you to speak for up to 1 minute, and you're going to name the dynamic that you're perceiving, and you're going to try and say it as like, I don't know, you're just trying to be accurate in describing what you think's going on, and a lot of us are then going to feel the urge to make a solution or to disagree, and it's like we're not doing that part. Like that's not what's happening here. Um, if you feel really moved by what you heard, go and sit with them at dinner time, or like maybe this person needs some support. Actually, they're like just really struggling to fit in, and they just need a bit more contact. Or no, they've seen something that you've seen, and you've been pissed off about it, and they seem like they're ready to move. So go and join them. If there was a way to sort of frame that it's
Yeah.
not a like solutionary process, then I think there could be something really fruitful in it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. For
Mm.
next time. Good,
Mm.
good thing to try. Yeah. Mm.
Um, I wondered, just when you said for next time, what immediately came up for me was I'm wondering what else you thought about for next time, which might be slightly off the initial context of this conversation, but it's just where my
Mm.
curiosity went, was like, have you, um, we've been going through different kinds of debriefing conversations.
Mm.
You've been to other events as well with different communities, and I
Mm.
just wonder if, yeah, if you've got any takeaways that are like, oh yeah, my iteration, if I was kind of going to do this, assuming it was roughly the same size, same location, same length of time, yeah, what would you change within those constraints?
Mm. I think that was another thing, that a reflection that came up. If there's like there's like this thing where it feels like the summer camp wants to be too many things and it wants to be two things and stuff. And I really liked your idea that you came up with of like, oh, it has these two purposes, and let's enshrine those two purposes a bit more explicitly, which is we want the micro solidarity network to come together, and we want to have a space where people can sort of experience some of that and get in touch with that and get to know that a bit. And so I really liked your idea of like, oh, okay, so let's bring the veterans, the people that are arguably part of the network. Let's bring those together, have them create a container, and then invite, once they've like done their reflection on how micro solidarity has been going, once they and so on, and they've created the field and so on, then invite people in that are new and that are curious about the thing. I think that would be I think that'd be one thing I'd be interested
Mm,
in
mm.
seeing.
Yeah, I've got another idea, and I don't know if it would fit in the same format or not. But the thing that's been coming to me lately is like, when I initially started talking about summer camp, it wasn't with any kind of clarity of vision. It was like I've been spending a lot of time on campsites and it's a good vibe and I want to hang out with micro solidarity people. And so I was like, summer camp. Like that was the clarity, you know, like really not a sharp vision. But I
Mhm.
had a clear vision the other day for actually more like boot camp than summer camp. Because a lot of people have said, oh, hosting summer camp is an amazing developmental opportunity. And I'm like, hmm, I mean, that's nice that the hosts are having a developmental opportunity, but wouldn't it be nicer if everyone was having a huge developmental opportunity? You know, like that to me just feels more integrated somehow. And so that's where I got this boot camp idea, which is more like um we are inviting in we're inviting people to come to an experience that's going to stretch them. Like we're going to push you out of your comfort zone, both in terms of like a confrontation with yourself, where you're going to have a some degree of shadow work or like some degree of like you're going to recognize you're going to look at some of the more unlovely parts of yourself or like the impacts that you have on a group that are actually not supportive, that are sort of antisocial. um there's that dimension, and then there's the other dimension which is more like we're going to push you to extend your agency and you're going to um host a more ambitious group experience than you ever have before. And you're going to get this incredible sense that there's like 50 people at your shoulders to support you in that.
Mhm.
And you're going to push and you're going to do something hard, and then everyone's going to like be with you through that process. And then we're going to party. You know, there's still the celebration dimension. There's still this like um this outbreak of enthusiasm. But it's actually as a result of having done some hard work. Um, and that we're like recruiting people who are up for doing something hard. And that's just where my current kind of enthusiasm is. It's like
Okay. How would you
um yeah.
how would you do that? Would you just select a lot of people that like want to experiment at the small scale? Or like how would you or would you just make it very long so that like I'm very
Mm.
curious how
Yeah,
you would do that.
I've got a
Or
few
is it
ideas. I mean, for one thing, there'd be an application process, I think. Um, there'd probably be some kind of explicit skills development. Like we did in the first micro solidarity gathering. It was like the agenda was actually two triangles. Like so the first day was a full training, and then the second day was like a half training, and then the third day was full open space. So it was like gradually transition from training to co-created. Something a bit like that makes sense to me, that it's like we're asking you to try on a bunch of skills and mindsets, so we've got to tell you what they are. um but I was thinking, for example, two dimensions. One is, how about instead of using open space to co-create the agenda, we have uh a different hosting crew every day, and the today's hosting crew is going to set the agenda based on their best guess of what would be interesting and useful. um and you might have the first couple of days done by the more experienced people, and then the next few days can be done by people with less experience. So they're like, oh yeah, I've seen how things work and I want to change it because it's boring, or it's, you know, whatever. So there's this missing piece that I'm going to bring. And so it's not just like I'm running a session, but I'm actually taking responsibility for a 24-hour container or a 12-hour container or something, you know, something like that, where it's like I'm actually engaging at that level of the whole group. Um, That some people would be up for that, I think. But then the more, maybe a different dimension that's a little bit more straightforward and less revolutionary is just like part of the intake process is some kind of evaluation that you're doing in a peer-to-peer way to say like, where's your level of competence when it comes to organizing groups? Um, if you've run a lot of camps, then we really want to know about your opinions about the whole system. If you've never run a dinner club or a book club, then like what are you doing in this week that you've got all these like the best possible circumstances to learn in? Like what is it going to be? How do you design for yourself a project that's going to be exciting, that pushes you out of your comfort zone and calls in the support you need to make it work? Yeah, there's some way of like getting people to evaluate where they are and then to say what's like a one or two doable stretches that I can do in this week. Um, I think there's something like that. And that for some people that'll be um yeah, I'm really anxious and shy and I haven't got a lot of experience. And so like running a 90-minute session on my particular focus area and learning how to facilitate that skillfully, that would be enormous for me. And then I think for other people who've got much more experience, they can actually probably learn most about how do you be a mentor in that situation. Like how do you create the context where you're activating those people rather than how do you actually go and do it? Because at a certain point, you master those things and it becomes second nature.
Right. Okay. All right. So the application process would lead to people sort of at different kind of frontiers of where the edge is. And then you would just have a bunch of people that whose frontier would be like, oh yeah, doing like a 90-minute workshop or designing an afternoon or something. And so then you because it's like it sounds like it's going to be a week or something, the boot camp, like something in that order, then there would be a bunch of space for people to do that in a maybe more open space type of fashion. And then the other people who want to push a little bit more, they would take responsibility, as you said, for like a bigger container and so on until. Mhm.
Have you ever been to an art of hosting training?
No, haven't.
I went to one and it was really cool. It was basically, I think, like it was like between two and four hosts that had really a lot of experience, and then another two to four helpers, and I was one of the helpers. Um, and then I don't know, 10 to 20 guests. And the hosts and the helpers got together first and sort of didn't design the agenda, but said like these are some of the I mean, in art of hosting terms, it's really all about like what are the specific facilitation moves? Like, can you do a fishbowl? Can you do a 1, 2, 4 all? Can you do a open space, dialogue circle? All these, what are these facilitation techniques? And we sort of like populated a spreadsheet almost of like, it'd be great if people got to learn like 15 out of these 30 skills. And then when all the guests arrived, there was a process to sort of like for each of them to gravitate to which ones they're more excited about. And then we slapped them all together on the board for the like 4 days of the training. And all of the guests were going to lead each of those. And the hosts and the helpers were just there to support them to do it really well, to like coach them to prep and then to coach them to debrief afterwards. Like, how did it go when you hosted that session? And it to me felt completely brilliant. Like it was such an effective upskilling process where 90% of the facilitation was done by people who were like really at the frontier of their learning. And for the others, they weren't learning about facilitation. They were learning about supporting facilitators, which is a really high leverage skill to learn. So something like that. I mean, I have this picture in my mind of like at the start of the gathering, you do these like lining up process where you're like, oh, if you're from New Zealand, go over there, and if you're from the Arctic, go over there, and we see where people are from in the world, and you just have a spectrum question, which is like, go to that end of the room if you feel completely confident to run a 90-minute session with 5 minutes notice, and go to that end of the room if that idea scares you, and you line people up, and then you basically just fold the line and you say, okay, the people who are the most intimidated by that are going to lead a session, and the person who's most experienced with that is going to be your number one cheerleader and it's going to like mobilize everything to make it as easy as possible. And that's the learning experience. You're both learning different roles.
Mhm.
So this kind of the excitement that I have. I don't know if it's realistic,
Mhm.
but that's the state of it at the moment.
That sounds really cool. That sounds nice. Sounds sounds different though than the summer campus. Like it's like feels almost like complementary. Like
Yeah.
could be there could be a summer camp. Well, yeah, it might be a little bit tricky to for people to join both in one summer, I guess. But in principle, they could be. Yeah, that's something.
And what do you think the summer camp, what's implied? Like what do you think a summer camp should be that's not that? or could be, or wants to be, or something.
Hmm. So this seems quite focused on facilitation, and like, yeah, facilitation is one of the topics in micro solidarity, I think. But um, there's like something about the vibe that's about that's diff. Uh, hmm. So okay, I'm just gonna. I'm not quite happy with it, but I'm just gonna say it. I think there were some people at the summer camp where they were quite happy to learn a little bit more about micro solidarity and connect with people in that network, but they were exploring in a way that was not geared towards like, I want to upskill my facilitation level, right? But more like,
Mhm.
oh, like I've heard interesting things about the techniques here or the vibes or something or the people, and so I'm gonna check it out. So there's an exploratory feel to it that I think, like, I heard from a bunch of people that were like, yeah, oh yeah, I had good things about it. It seemed interesting, so I was like, I'm gonna join and check it out and see what it is like. And that feels like kind of unlikely with the thing that you're describing to me.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, a few
yeah,
people would do that, but like mostly like it feels more focused. That's part of the appeal, honestly, as well. It's
yeah,
like, oh yeah,
yeah,
this like people are going to be more committed to this, and this is going to be like like you said it, a boot camp, right? So yeah, so I think that's one of
mm.
the key differences.
I,
I mean,
I think I agree with that perspective, and there was a lot of people, a lot of new people that said exactly what you're saying. Like when I asked them why did you come, they're like, oh, vague vibe reasons. And I'm glad they all came. Like, don't get me wrong, but also I'm like, I don't think if that's the majority answer of why new people are coming, I don't think that's creating momentum. Like, I don't think that's
mhm,
yeah, it doesn't feel like a lot of vitality there. It feels like, oh, we're a supportive place for new people to find each other. That's cool. That's like a good thing to be. Um, but it doesn't feel like it's an advancing a field of practice,
mhm,
which is what I want to be doing. Like I do. I I think my big disappointment with a lot of events, including this one, is I wish the meta level was more accessible than it is. Like I always want people to be tracking the meta. And I'm always surprised and disappointed that it's like, oh no, most people spend most of their time in the group and that takes up all their awareness and they're not thinking about the dynamics of the group. Um, and I think to get people to pay more attention to the meta, you have to kind of make the meta a bit more central.
mhm. But that will also filter the people. Like you'll get the facilitators, right? You'll get the people
Yeah,
like you and me that
yeah,
have that inclination to go meta more.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. And hopefully there's enough diversity of events on offer that the people that want to just like meet awesome, interesting people and explore and play and relax will have those spaces to do that in. Um, I think by the sound of it, Tree Week kind of satisfied that feeling, and I think the year before, Just Camp really satisfied that feeling for a lot of people. And like if those things are just like happening enough, um, and also there could be smaller micro solidarity events, I think that are just more like it's more like a picnic or like a 2-day picnic or a 3-day picnic. That's more, yeah, it's a party with a tiny bit of work happening rather than like a workathon with a big celebration at the end.
Mhm. Oh no, I that's what I'm part of what I'm thinking. It's like, oh yeah,
Mm,
maybe Berlin has enough micro solidarity people that they would throw a small festival over the weekend or something, even if the
mm,
boot camp happens.
yeah.
Mm.
Because I mean, I guess, like I gave the example about Doro setting up the music room. I would love it if we were making memes like that. Um, that say like what Doro did there with setting up the music was not a random action, but that's like a category of something that she did. Um, and that if you can become aware that this category of skills exist, and you can realize it's actually very accessible. There's just a couple of moves. Um, I'd love it if Micro Solidarity was responsible for deploying a lot of those agency increasing moves and that people were like,
Mm.
just picking them up in the broader culture. And I don't think someone who needs to learn those skills, I don't think is going to come to a boot camp. Like the boot camp is too intimidating, or it's like, oh, that's not really, I'm not really that interested in that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I'm wondering how to close the gap between, yeah, the super passionate people that are gonna iterate those memes, and like how do you design that in a way that people understand what it is and what it's for. Like that's an expertise is required for that. But then spread it to make it super accessible for people who are like only incidentally interested in groups because they're trying to get to this other outcome that they're excited about. That's a great puzzle.
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I'm really excited about, this like is one of the things I really took from the summer camp that I really enjoyed. This like, right, this like more concrete idea of this, like, I don't know, I'm thing popped into my mind of like leadership by invitation or something, right? Or problem solving by invitation.
Yeah.
Um and yeah. And I could totally see a boot camp like allowing for prototyping more of those kinds of things. Um, but then yeah, the spreading would need to be somewhere else, I think.
Well, the spread could be like, a handful of micro solidarity operatives going to Tree Week or going to another camp or another event and being like, hey, you guys are all
Uh...
hanging out and just having a nice time. When you inevitably get frustrated, come and talk to me because I know some moves.
Oh my God. Oh God. Just the meme of Miso operative, like micro solidarity operative is just like it's great. Oh, have you heard about Tariq? Yeah, yeah. I hear we have three operatives there.
Yeah. Yeah. In the same way that you want to bring a chef to an event like that because it's better to have someone who really knows what they're doing in the kitchen, even if a lot of the labor is going to come from everyone. Like having someone who's really developed that expertise
Hmm.
makes the whole thing better for everyone. So I'm like, yeah, be good to have
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
vibe chef, at least a couple of vibe mechanics at every gathering.
Yeah. A couple of side mechanics. Yeah. And that's what often makes the difference, right? It's like, do you manage to attract some vibe mechanics to your event? And
Yeah,
do they have room to work? Do they have capacity to actually do
yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Good stuff. Stuff. Has me very excited for next year.
Me too. Me too. Yeah. And just imagine if we get our retreat center in the next 6 months so that these upcoming events are actually happening in a venue that is ours and that is like, yeah, that these patterns are actually being baked into the architecture, not just into the meme sphere, but into the bricks and mortar.
Hmm.
Ooh.
Hmm. I noticed like a trend towards like I don't know where we are with time. Oh yeah, we're kind of up. But like that actually brings up something that pinged up when you said boot camp and also now with the retreat center. It's
Hmm.
just like one thing that and something also related to what you said about the summer camp. You were like, oh yeah, it was actually kind of uncomfortable trusting us, the hosting team, with like you're not right with summer camp and sort of this, oh yeah, kind of the future of my solidarity like hinges a little bit on like how this goes, or like is at least influenced by how this goes and stuff. And I just like, oh, with the boot camp or the retreat center, I have a little bit of the opposite kind of like,
Hmm.
oh, that might be quite centralizing actually.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wonder. I don't know
Oh yeah.
whether
Oh
you've
yeah.
thought about
No,
that.
definitely. I mean, I'll get even more explicit about it. I want to run the next summer camp. Like
Okay.
whatever it's going to be called. Like I want to I really want to do a power grab. I'm like, okay, you guys had a turn. This is great. Now it's my turn. That we've been doing some R&D
Uh,
and some prototyping, and now I'm like inspired, and I want to take those lessons and push it to the next level, and recruit people and be
mhm,
like, hey, we're doing this thing. Do you want to come with me? I think it's going to be awesome. Um, and just take the next step that way. And then I think the crucial thing will be to let go of the reins of power again and be like, hey,
mhm,
who's up next? Who's having a turn?
mhm.
Because um, one of the things that has just been so gratifying about this network is the feeling that we're building a deep bench. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of different people that have got a lot of skills. Like, and some of that is like the skills are being developed where like people are coming into the network and they're learning a lot and they're getting to learn. And then there's other people like I think you're an example of this. I think Chef's an example of this. There's a bunch of people that actually already had quite a lot of facilitation skill, and really it's just been a chance for the network to get to know you, for me to get to know you, for us to sort of like harmonize on our understandings of each other and be like, oh right, you're actually quite experienced with this stuff. You know what you're doing. And now we've got a shared language and a shared reputations, like we can count I know what I can count on you for next time. Like that kind of process of building up, yeah, the deep bench, like this like squad of like talented people with shared understanding is like that's gonna deliver a lot of goodness over the next few years. I'm completely convinced of that.
Mm, right. Mm. Seems like a good
Power
closing
grab.
note. Power trip. You sure you want to publish this?
Yeah, always, always. I mean, it's just something that I learned from Inspiral. I think Alana, who was really one of the core, like co-founding team, um, Alana Irving, she wrote a really good paper about this, about explicitly sometimes the way to get the group to the next stage is a small group needs to grab power, centralize, you know, build a case, build consensus, push us to the next stage, and then let go. And it's
Mhm.
that like taking power to give up power and that liberating more people along the process. Like I do think that is it's kind of like a natural dialectic that's required sometimes. So
Right.
I'm happy to take a
Yeah.
turn.
Yeah. Huh. I feel like I just learned something. Something clicked. Yeah.
Nice.
Mm. Sort of the next fractal level of the liberatory leadership kind of thing.
Yeah, the fractal insight generator is very can be very potent.
Mm.
I try not to let myself get too carried away with it because it's easy to get up and into the meta and actually completely lose track of the concrete. But
Yeah.
I'm happy with
Yeah.
the balance that we're striking so far.
Nice. Well,
Let's leave it there, eh?
yeah. Let's leave it
Thanks
there.
for the invitation. That was really fun.
Thank you for yeah, bringing your expertise and stuff to it, and yeah, allowing me to bring the topic. It was really fun.